Kindness costs nothing. The sentiment that informs this statement comes from the belief that one of the reasons we are here on this earth is to take care of one another. Now, you hear that phrase. I've said it how many weeks now? We are here to take care of one another. If I sound like a broken record, it's because I am. The gospel message is pretty clear. We take care of one another. Regardless of the monetary cost, the kindness that we extend to others, if genuine, never costs us anything spiritually. In fact, kindness towards others provides us with a net spiritual gain. Doing good things for others is one of the easiest ways to feel good all the time. Spiritually, we feel more connected with God whenever we give without expecting anything in return. Unfortunately, though, for most people, there are always expectations of something in return, even if it is a word of thanks for what we have done. I think about this a lot. For years now, I've come to the conclusion that our worst enemy is selfishness and self-centeredness. You've heard me say this a lot as well. When our primary focus is looking out for our own self-interest, there is little room for the interest of others. The older I get, the more I realize that it isn't a group of people across an ocean that pose the greatest threat to my life. It is my own selfish and self-centeredness that will kill my ability to be kind, compassionate, or caring toward others. When my own self-interest become more important than the betterment of the whole, I am no longer living the teachings of Christ. Even though we didn't read the first few verses of Romans 12, we did last week. If you were here, you hopefully remember them. This whole chapter speaks to the issue of selfish and self-centered behavior. Paul starts with how we live as individuals and then moves us from personal behavior to corporate behavior. In the first two verses of this chapter, Paul writes, "I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed through the renewing of your mind." Renewing of your mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Paul is pointing out to the Romans that the way we live matters. Our bodies should be living sacrifices, which is our spiritual worship. When Paul talks about being a living sacrifice, he is moving folks away from the tradition of the Jewish sacrificial system, where something must be killed as a substitution for the sins of the individual. Instead, he is talking about sacrifice from the perspective of how we live, how we emulate the life of Christ. The things we say and the things we do reflect who we are in the world. If this is sounding familiar, it will for weeks and weeks and weeks to come. This idea of being a living sacrifice is at the core of eliminating our selfish and self-centered behaviors. Paul knew that our minds are powerful and that it is what we think that we usually manifest. As we move into today's scripture, we realize that the instructions that Paul gives the Roman church are fairly straightforward. In fact, they are so explicit that I can't help but wonder why they are so difficult for us to follow. We talk about the Christian life in this country as though it were a competition, competing for souls in God's kingdom. And when folks turn away from the message, we blame them for not seeing the value of being a follower of Christ. But let's be honest. More people walk away from Christianity because of not finding value in the behavior of Christians, because of hypocrisy, not because of the teachings of Christ. Our lack of adherence to the teachings of Christ is frustrating, especially when you think about how clear Christ was regarding how we are to behave. Paul begins by telling the Romans in verse 9, "Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil, hold fast to what is good." This is no small feat. In English, the words genuine, hate, evil, and good are too subjective. So instead of allowing Paul's words to force us into some serious self-examination of our behaviors toward others, we instead quibble about what it means to be genuine or good. And we like arguing about what is evil. I don't know that we'll ever agree on what that means. If Paul stopped at the end of verse 9, it would be difficult to continue this sermon. There are too many variables to consider. Fortunately, Paul doesn't stop. He spells out what it means by genuine and good. In verse 10, Paul writes, "Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another, showing honor." This verse mirrors Jesus' commandment to love one another and to treat others the way we would like to be treated. When we fail to love with mutual affection, or when we treat others poorly, we are also sending a message that is very mixed. As I've said before, so many of the teachings of Christ are opposite of what we are taught in the West. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Sell all you have and follow me. Come to God with childlike faith. I can't ignore the fact that many of the behaviors we think are right often bring more conflict and strife than reconciliation. Paul continues to push in verse 16, "Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are." I realize when Paul is writing this that he is directing the statement to a specific audience, but isn't it really a more universal truth? Don't we want to live in harmony with each other? Here lies our dilemma. If we are exacting revenge, we are departing from harmonious living and creating more divisiveness. In this instance, we are claiming to be wiser than God and that our ways of being are more astute than God's ways of being. Verse 17, Paul continues with his clear thoughts. "Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all." Ouch. Paul is not giving us a way out at all. Not only does Paul want us to live in harmony with others, but when they treat us wrong, we are not to treat them wrong in return. The word noble in this verse sticks in my throat as well. We are to behave in a way that exhibits exalted moral or mental character or excellence. In other words, mediocrity doesn't cut it. One of the most talked about issues in Christianity today is the decline of moral and mental character in the United States. What is lacking, though, is honest discourse on what constitutes moral and mental character. Paul gives us a list of behaviors in this passage that do not reflect the current climate in this country. We are quick to retaliate, to respond to evil with more evil. We have forgotten how to extend biblical hospitality to strangers, the offer of food, shelter, clothing, and spiritual respite. We delight in what is evil. Otherwise, the news would only consist of good things reflecting of how we take care of one another. And we certainly don't live peaceably with one another. There is more violence everywhere: road rage, domestic violence, gang violence, and the like. Violence is so prevalent that many people live in fear that they might be the next victim of some heinous crime. How is this taking care of one another? How do we even cope with such a bleak outlook? I think Anne Frank said it best. In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I simply cannot build up my hopes on a foundation consisting of confusion, misery, and death. Yes, we could focus on the confusion in this world, the misery of life, and even the fact that we are going to die. But what Frank reminds us is that hope carries us beyond these realities. Hope is what sustains the spirit and brings new life. Hope is what Christ offers us every time we invite him to be in the moment with us. Hope is also the genesis of kindness. If we are to change the world, to really be the hands and feet of Christ, then we have to start with our own minds. We have to first change the way we think. We can no longer hold on to grudges. We can no longer plot revenge. We can no longer delight in what is evil. Something has to change. It is a fundamental fact that it is what we think that we manifest. The things that we ruminate on are those things to which we give life. I suggest to you today that the first place we can start is with kindness. Kindness costs nothing. Imagine a world where everyone smiled at each other, or a world where people actually said hello, please, or even thank you. Imagine a world where people held the doors for each other and allowed others to go first. Or imagine our highways where drivers actually slowed down instead of trying to race to their destination, nearly running people off the road. Imagine a world where everyone had enough to eat, had clothing and shelter because everyone shared from their bounty. Imagine a world where mercy and grace were more important than anger and revenge. I could go on and on, but I think you get the point. Regardless of the monetary cost, kindness costs nothing. Spiritually, kindness produces a net gain, even if it means spending a few dollars. Our hearts have become so hardened by the world that we have forgotten how to be kind. When we extend kindness to others, everything becomes bright. When we are able to let the love of Christ penetrate us and move outward toward others, all the differences that we want to hold up as problematic barriers suddenly disappear. What we are left with is another child of God. We are no better or no worse than any other living person on this planet. God created us all, and we will all return to God. In the meantime, it would be nice if we learned how to truly care for one another, how to give selflessly to the needs of others, and to trust God to provide the necessary resources to make that happen. Kindness costs nothing. Paul's letter to the Romans provides us with a blueprint of how the church is supposed to be in relation to the world. This is our mandate. Together, we can make the world a better place, starting with a smile, a hello, a please, or a thank you. Let your love be genuine. Love what is good. Rejoice in hope. And remember, kindness costs nothing. I want you to say it with me so you'll remember it. Kindness costs nothing. May it be so. Amen.